We're going to do another version of the comparative advantage model. So as before, we'll assume two countries. So let's have the UK and France. And my pen decided not to work there. And let's have cloth and wheat as the two products, and we'll have measures of the output per worker, and we'll assume that the UK cloth output per worker is 10 and wheat output per worker is 7, while in France cloth output per worker is 6 and wheat output per worker is 5. And let's assume that the UK has 30 workers and France has 40 workers. So remember, as before, units are irrelevant. We don't care what these units of cloth, wheat, workers are. We're just going to proceed without caring too much about how we're measuring these things. So the first thing we do is draw the production possibility frontiers real quick. So we can draw them cloth. Again, it's arbitrary what we put on the y-axis, but we'll want to remember what we're putting on the y-axis when we derive the prices. So I have cloth and wheat for the UK and cloth and wheat for France. In the UK, the total amount of cloth produced, if all the workers were producing cloth, would be 300, and the amount of wheat produced would be 210, so you'd have a production possibility frontier that looks like that. In France, the total amount of cloth produced would be 240, and the total amount of wheat produced would be 200. So something like that. So notice now I've got slopes that are not so obviously different from each other, and moreover, if you go up and notice the numbers, the UK is more productive in cloth than France, and the UK is more productive in wheat than France. So the UK has absolute advantage in both, and it won't be so obvious to us who has comparative advantage in what, because the UK has absolute advantage in both. So when we think about comparative advantage, we look at this 10 relative to this 6 and note that UK seems to be more productive in cloth relative to how much more productive it is in wheat. So we go from 6 to 10 compared to going from 5 to 7. UK is more productive in both, indeed, but it's relatively more productive in cloth. Alternatively, France is it's bad at both, but it's relatively less bad at wheat. So the UK is relatively more productive in cloth. And France relatively less bad at wheat, so we say that France has the comparative advantage in wheat. So that's important to establish that intuition, because when we derive the prices, we'll want to remember that intuition. So if we now calculate the pre-trade prices for the UK, we have the price of cloth times the marginal product of labor in cloth has to be equal to the price of wheat times the marginal product of labor in wheat. So that's for the UK. So if we think about the marginal product of labor in cloth, that was 10, and wheat is 7. So we have 10 and 7 PWPC. So now we can remember, well, do we want to put it PC over PW or PW over PC? And we go back to our table here, our production possibility frontier, and we remember that that we're going to be measuring how much cloth you get for a unit of wheat. So we're going to have P wheat over P cloth. That's going to tell us how much cloth we get for a unit of wheat. and that's going to be equal to 10 over 7. So that's the UK. And for France, we're going to have PW over P cloth. Go back and find what France's productivity of cloth is, 6 and 5. So it's going to be equal to 6 and 5. So again, we see that wheat is relatively expensive in the UK. This is France. So the price of wheat is relatively high compared to cloth in the UK compared with France. So wheat is expensive in the UK, and wheat is cheap in France relative to the other commodity. So remember what we had here. France had comparative advantage in wheat. That's the same thing as saying that France has comparative advantage in wheat. That France has a relatively lower price. So now we find what the pre-trade prices. We found what the pre-trade prices are: 10.765. So the world price will be somewhere in between 10/7 and 6/5. So as before, we find a common denominator. So 35 is a nice common denominator. So we have 50 over 35, and we have 42 over 35. So a world price of 45 over 35 would be a feasible world price. So it's greater than equal. So we might hypothesize that this is going to be our world price, and then we simply go back and show the gains from trade. So if we go back to our production possibility frontier for the UK, 300 and 210. And it's not really quite drawn to scale, and we had cloth and wheat on the axes, cloth and wheat. The UK had comparative advantage in cloth, and so wherever it was going to be producing, it was going to be able to trade along the trading line. That's the world price. The slope is the world price. Remember that's important. The slope of this trading line equals PW, which is going to be PW over PC. This is world. And the UK will then specialize in cloth production, and if it completely specializes, be able to attain consumption out there. So remember, this is the PPF, and this is consumption possibilities. And for France, we have the same scenario, except that France will specialize in wheat and trade the wheat for cloth. So that's the comparative advantage model in essence. And remember, the bottom line is showing that there are gains from trade. They can now consume outside of their production possibility frontier. That's the bottom line of this model.